every Thanksgiving. My family sits around the dining table and pretends to be a Norman Rockwell painting. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, at opposite ends. My sister Chloe and her perfect life glowing under the chandelier. And me, Evelyn, tucked into a corner. We smile, we laugh, we toast to our good fortune and to Chloe's success as an interior designer. A career my parents always said was the creative outlet this family desperately needed. I used to believe it was a beautiful scene, until I realized I was the one paying for the paint. I was the silent partner, the financial safety net, and the convenient scapegoat for every small mess my family made. That's when I stopped smiling. That's when I decided a beautiful lie wasn't worth the price. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Evelyn! I held my water glass so tightly the ice cubes cracked against the side, but the chill in my hand was nothing compared to the cold knot twisting in my stomach as I listened to my mother's voice. The crystal chandelier above the mahogany dining table cast a warm, golden glow on everyone but me, its light finding and clinging to my sister Chloe, who sat beaming in a sage green dress. Her new portfolio of interior designs laid out like a royal decree for our family to admire. My mother, Eleanor, raised her champagne flute, a delicate sound of crystal on crystal echoing through the room, as she announced with the casual grace of a queen praising her most cherished subject that Chloe was a visionary, a true artist who had finally been recognized in a national magazine. My father, Richard, clapped her on the back, his eyes full of a pride so deep it felt like a physical presence in the room, while my aunts and uncles murmured their approval, each compliment a sharp little pinprick to my own fragile sense of self. Then the silence fell, and my mother's gaze, which had been so full of light, turned to me, a cool, appraising look that always came right before the truth. "It's a good thing we have someone like Evelyn," she said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "Someone who chose a stable career to handle the small messes we sometimes make." A comment so perfectly veiled it took me a second to realize she wasn't praising my intelligence, but instead reminding me of my place, the family's silent workhorse, the one who cleaned up the mess while everyone else celebrated. The quiet understanding of my role in the family had always been a given, a silent contract signed with my first paycheck. But the moment she gave it a label, a name, a casual mention in the midst of a celebration for someone else, it became a brand, a permanent mark on my skin. I excused myself from the table, claiming a need for fresh air, and stepped out onto the wide stone patio. The crisp autumn air, a welcome shock to my senses. The stars were brilliant, a distant, glittering reminder of a world that didn't revolve around my family's expectations. And for a moment I let myself breathe, let the cool night air fill my lungs, let the bitterness in my throat recede. I thought of all the phone calls, all the bank transfers, all the times I'd rearrange my own budget, postpone my own dreams, to cover a sudden unforeseen expense or a temporary setback that always seemed to coincide with one of Chloe's new projects or extravagant purchases. I'd always told myself I was helping, that this was what family did, a quiet, unspoken duty I was uniquely qualified for with my degree in financial analysis. When I finally returned inside, the conversation had moved on. Everyone was talking about Chloe's new project, a high-profile design for a boutique hotel downtown, a project that would surely catapult her into the upper echelons of her field. My mother caught my eye and gestured for me to sit back down, a look of impatience on her face, as if I'd been gone for an unacceptably long time. As I settled into my chair, my father leaned in, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "Evelyn, your mother and I are so proud of you for being so responsible. It's not every day you find a daughter who is willing to put the family first." The words, meant to be comforting, landed like a punch to my gut, a stark, painful reminder that my worth was measured not in my own accomplishments, but in my utility to them. I wanted to scream, to ask them what they had ever done for me. But the words stuck in my throat, a familiar lump of resentment and silence. That night, lying in my bed, the memory of my mother's words replayed in my head. A venomous loop. My phone buzzed with a message from Chloe, a smiling selfie of her and my parents, with a caption thanking them for their unwavering support. A tidal wave of anger and betrayal washed over me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to question everything. The next morning, I began to do what I did best. I started to analyze the data. I pulled up my bank statements, organized them by date, and highlighted every single transfer to my parents' account over the past 2 years, the ones I had always dismissed as just helping out. The number that began to emerge was staggering. A mountain of money that I had given away. A small fortune that could have paid off my own student loans, could have gone towards a down payment on my own home, could have given me the freedom I'd always craved but never allowed myself to pursue. I found a stack of old mail I'd been holding for my parents, financial documents they'd left at my place and asked me to sort through later. I sat on my couch, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air, and began to flip through the papers, my fingers trembling slightly as I recognized a familiar bank logo on a credit card statement. It wasn't a small mess. It was a systemic pattern of living beyond their means, of treating my money as an endless resource. I saw charges for a luxury trip to Italy, a trip they had told me they'd won, a weekend getaway they had described with such effusive joy, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Then I found it, a receipt for a down payment on a luxury yacht, a purchase they had never mentioned, an extravagance that directly contradicted their claims of temporary financial hardship. The words on the page blurred, then sharpened with horrifying clarity. This wasn't help. This was exploitation. I wasn't just supporting them. I was funding their secrets, their lies, their lavish lifestyle. A cold, hard resolve settled over me, replacing the anger and the pain. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to confront them in a fit of rage. I was going to do what I always did. I was going to gather the data. I spent the next few days meticulously compiling a digital ledger, a spreadsheet that would serve as my irrefutable evidence. I included every transfer, every date, every amount, every charge I had found. And I organized it all into neat, color-coded categories: mortgage assistance, credit card bailouts, unforeseen expenses. At the bottom of the page, I typed in a formula that would add up every single dollar. And when the final number appeared, I stared at it for a long, quiet moment, a lump forming in my throat that I couldn't swallow. Over $60,000. That was the price of their perception of me, the price of my quiet, unspoken role, the price of their public-facing success. I knew I couldn't just drop this on them over the phone or in a text message. This had to be a moment of stark, brutal truth, a moment that would force them to see me not as their financial lifeline, but as an independent human being with her own dreams and her own life. I decided to wait for the next family dinner, the next one of our weekly, obligatory gatherings that I had always dreaded, but now saw as an opportunity. As I drove to their house, a heavy black leather binder sat on the passenger seat next to me, its weight a physical manifestation of the burden I had been carrying. I walked into the house, the familiar smell of my mother's lemon polish and roasted chicken filling the air, and found them all gathered in the dining room, the same room where they had celebrated Chloe's success just a few weeks prior. My father was talking about the new yacht he was considering buying, describing it in lavish detail, while my mother and Chloe nodded along enthusiastically. I walked past them all, my heart a steady, slow drum in my chest, and placed the binder in the very center of the table, its soft thud echoing in the sudden silence. My father paused mid-sentence, his eyes flicking from the binder to me, a flash of confusion on his face. "Evelyn, what is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly wary. I took a deep breath, the air thick with unspoken words, and pulled a chair away from the table. Not sitting, but standing, a visual boundary between us. "It's a summary," I said, my voice steady. professional, devoid of any emotion. A financial summary of all the payments I've made to you over the last 2 years. I opened the binder, flipping to the first tab labeled Mortgage Payments, and slid it toward my mother. Let's start with the mortgage. 24 payments at $1,200 each. That's $28,800. My mother's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock on her face, before she quickly composed herself. Evelyn, that's just what family does. We help each other out. I agree, I said, my voice unwavering. But this isn't a one-time emergency, it's a habit. I flipped to the next tab, Chloe's student loans. I held up the page for her to see, the highlighted numbers a stark, undeniable testament to her deception. $19,400 paid off in full, with my money. The money you told me was for the family's temporary financial hardship. My father's face went pale. He looked from the binder to my mother, a silent, panicked conversation passing between them. I turned another page. Car payments for Chloe's new Mazda, $3,600. I could see Chloe's reflection in the dining room window, her phone in her hand, a look of confusion on her face as she watched the drama unfold. And finally, I said, my voice a low, cold whisper, credit card bills. I fanned out the statements, a cascade of debt that revealed the truth behind their carefully constructed facade. $9,200 for designer clothes, expensive dinners, and that work trip to Italy you took last year. The one you told me you won. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. My mother stared at me, her usual dismissive hand gesture frozen in midair, her face a mask of disbelief. My father, who had always been the strong, silent patriarch, now looked like a ghost, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Chloe finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with shock. "What's going on?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and for the first time, I saw them for who they really were. They weren't my protectors. They were my exploiters. They weren't my family. They were my clients. And I was done. The grand total, I said, turning to the last page, the number highlighted in bright yellow, is $61,000. That's what it cost me to be part of this family. I closed the binder with a final, decisive click, the sound echoing in the silent room like a gavel in a courtroom. I won't be taking a seat at the table anymore, I said, my voice filled with a strange, new power. And I won't be making any more payments. You can either figure out how to pay your own bills, or you can sell the house. That's up to you. I turned and walked out, leaving the binder on the table, a silent witness to their betrayal. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls and text messages, a cascade of angry, pleading, and confused communication from my family. I silenced my phone, not out of anger, but out of a need for space, a need to breathe and to think without their voices in my head. I had a single brief conversation with Chloe, who called me in a panic, her voice full of genuine confusion and a hint of betrayal. "Mom and Dad told me you were happy to help," she said, her voice trembling. "They said you had extra money, that you wanted to contribute." I told her I would send her all the documents, all the proof, and I hung up the phone before I could hear the inevitable excuses. I knew that she'd been as much of a victim as I had, a pawn in our parents' manipulative game. I started to feel a strange, exhilarating lightness as the days went by, a sense of freedom I had never known. The weight I had been carrying for years, the burden of being the responsible one, the one who always had to step in and clean up the mess, was gone. I began to look at my own life with a new perspective, and for the first time, I allowed myself to dream. I looked at my own student loan debt, the mountain of it that I had been slowly chipping away at for years, and I realized that with the money, I was no longer giving away. I could pay it off in a fraction of the time. The thought was intoxicating, a promise of a future that was truly and completely my own. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected text from Chloe, a simple message that read, "We need to talk." My heart pounded in my chest as I drove to meet her. The memory of our final conversation at the family dinner still a raw, open wound. We met at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral territory where we could talk without the ghosts of our past haunting us. She looked different, the usual carefree sparkle in her eyes replaced with a new, quiet seriousness. "I looked at the documents you sent me," she said, her voice low. "I had no idea. They told me you were happy to help, that you loved being able to support my career. They made it sound like it was your idea." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "I know," I said. I used to believe that too. We talked for hours, not about our parents, but about our own lives, about our hopes and our dreams, about the people we wanted to be. I told her about my job, about my love for data and numbers, and she told me about her passion for design, about the pressure she felt to be successful, to live up to the image our parents had created for her. For the first time in our lives, we were sisters, not competitors, not rivals, but two women who had been used and manipulated by the people who were supposed to love them the most. We didn't solve all our problems that day, but we started to lay the foundation for a new relationship, one built on honesty and truth, not on lies and manipulation. A few weeks after that, I got a call from my father, his voice strained and unfamiliar. "Evelyn," he said, "your mother and I have been thinking. We've come up with a compromise. If you'll agree to help us with the mortgage again, we'll make sure everyone knows how much you help. We'll tell all our friends, all our family. We'll give you the credit you deserve." I listened to his words, a cold, hollow laugh building in my chest. He still didn't get it. He still thought my worth was tied to a number, to a public announcement of my generosity. "Dad," I said, my voice a quiet whisper, "I'm not risking my financial future for a shout out on Facebook. That arrangement is over." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The following months were a whirlwind of change and new beginnings. I took a new job at a company in Seattle, a position that came with a significant salary increase and the promise of a future I had only dared to dream of. I sold my old car, a practical, reliable sedan that had served its purpose, and I bought a small one-bedroom condo in a quiet, green neighborhood, a place that was truly and completely my own. I didn't get any help from my parents. I didn't ask for any. I did it all on my own, with the money I had earned and, for the first time, had been able to keep. My life was finally mine. I received an email from Chloe a few months later, a long, heartfelt message that made my eyes well up with tears. She told me that our parents had been forced to sell the house, that they had been unable to make the mortgage payments on their own. She told me that she had taken on a part-time job to help them with the moving expenses, that she had decided to pay her own way for the first time in her life. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," she wrote. "I'm so sorry that I never knew what you were doing for me. I'm so sorry that I took advantage of your kindness." She ended the email by asking if she could visit me in Seattle, if she could see the life I had built for myself. My reply was short but sincere. "I'd love that," I wrote. "I can't wait to show you my city." I sat in my new living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, a cup of tea in my hand, and a feeling of profound peace in my heart. The memories of my old life, of the endless phone calls and the quiet resentment, were still there. But they were no longer a burden. They were a lesson, a reminder of the person I used to be and the person I had become. The woman who used to bend and break for her family, the one who lived in the shadows of their lies, was gone. In her place was a new woman, a strong, independent, and free woman, one who had finally found her voice and her own truth. My old life had been a series of compromises, but my new life was a series of choices, and for the first time, they were all my own.